As Richard said, I'd like to address this F word this morning, because both in my practice, my medical practice, and with our corporate clients, we're seeing a profound and pervasive fatigue at the moment. Dr. Hans Sale, who was an endocrinologist, described something called gas. He wasn't referring to the after effects of a curry from your local takeout. I'm talking about the general adaptation syndrome. And this comprises three distinct phases in our body's response to stress. So we can all relate to the alarm phase, faced with a sudden existential threat, we get a surge of stress hormones and a burst of energy. And that was very much part of the national experience at the start of lockdown 1.0. And most stress is short-lived. But whenever stress continues without pause, without break, as we've had, we enter the second phase in the general adaptation syndrome. And this is one of resistance. We try to carry on regardless. And to a degree, we might think we're coping. But our body tells a very different story. Because our blood pressure goes up and stays up, our heart rate rises, our blood sugar levels creep up, and our ability to fight infection is seriously suppressed. Not great in a global pandemic. And eventually our defenses become overwhelmed and we slide into this third phase of the syndrome: persistent fatigue, exhaustion, maybe even burnout. We get brain fog, poor concentration and memory, a sense of ennui, procrastination, lack of productivity. Does this sound familiar to anyone? But how does being cognizant of the theory about prolonged stress actually help us to retune our firms to fire on all cylinders post-pandemic? Well, the bad news, I'm afraid, is that unfortunately, in our experience, solutions that merely put the onus on individuals to counter this fatigue themselves really won't get us where we need to be. So slapping a lunchtime mindfulness session on the agenda in the name of well-being is not going to cut it. We have to look at organisational ways of working, which often perpetuate workforce fatigue. This is exactly what we do at Concilio Health. We give firms the data to show them what is really driving and detracting from the well-being and therefore the performance of their people, and we work with them to fix it. But there is some good news, and I'd like to share three really practical tips this morning to help us to begin the ascent out of that post-pandemic fatigue trough. So the human brain accounts for a mere 2% of our body weight, but at any one time when we're awake, it's using 25% of our body's available energy. So what we put in our mouths has a really profound effect on our cognitive performance. And we've evolved with literally trillions of health-giving bacteria that colonize our lower bowel. And like all pets, they need feeding. And one of the issues with the beige, bland and boring typical Western diet, I'm thinking rice, pasta, spuds, bread, cereals, especially the white processed versions of these, is that by the time they get to the lower bowel, there really isn't any fibrous residue for these little chaps to chomp on. And so you might have heard perhaps of the gut-brain axis. We all know that we need to be that little bit closer to the conveniences if we're in a high-pressure situation, a pitch, a presentation, a job interview. So we kind of know that our brain talks to our gut, but our gut also talks to our brain. And this crosstalk seems to be heavily influenced by signals from the various strains of these good gut bugs. And it has a real impact on the areas of our brain that are involved in regulating our mood, our higher cognitive functions, and our mental sharpness. So one quick tip to counteract fatigue is to give these old friends, if you like, more plant-based foods to feed on, dialing up the fruit and vegetables, the nuts, the seeds, the fish, the whole grains, and dialing down the sugar and processed foods. And it is possible to significantly change your gut microbiome, the proportions of these different good gut bacteria, in just 2 weeks by de-stressing your diet in this way. Next thing, have you ever got into your car at the end of a busy day and had to readjust your driving mirror? Even though when you parked up in the morning, it was in the perfect position? The reason for this is probably dehydration. Our brains are 60% water, and adequate hydration is another must for brain function. So much so that our bodies have become incredibly adept at reappropriating water from elsewhere whenever we're in negative fluid balance. So at the end of a busy day, perhaps when you've drunk mainly tea or coffee, your body will steal water from the intervertebral discs, those little shock absorbers that sit between your spine bones. So you'll end the day that little bit shorter than you started it. Don't worry, it does reverse. But the first sign of dehydration is often fatigue rather than thirst. And as we get older, particularly, our thirst response gets blunted. So our performance will be impacted before we feel thirsty. So another quick tip for fatigue is to keep a bottle of water to hand at your home-based workstation, in the car, and don't forget to drink it. One last fact, I know I've only got 5 minutes. Our body's main stress hormone, cortisol, is manufactured down the same common pathway in the body as our sex hormones. For me, that's estrogen and progesterone. For you guys, that's testosterone. So therefore, if you are persistently driving off your stress response, working through lunch, not taking breaks, not getting enough sleep, failing to do the things that you really enjoy, that recharge you, you are effectively forcing your body to chuck out more and more cortisol, which will be at the expense of your sex hormones. So I leave you with a question: sex hormones or stress hormones? Which would you rather have more of? I know which one I will be choosing.